Hi, my name's Linda, and I healed from post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'd like to give you a little bit of insight into how I did and also what it is, because if I'm going to say I healed from it, what did I heal from? So I want to use the definition that the charity in the UK, registered charity called Mind, uses. They help people with mental health issues, and they're obviously a group of professionals, so that's why I'm using their definition. And also, they have written it in a way that's nice and easy to understand. So you can find them at mind.org.uk. Okay, so they say complex post-traumatic stress disorder, sometimes abbreviated to CPTSD, which is the way you'll see it on my website, is a condition where you experience some symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, along with some additional symptoms. Okay, so what are these additional symptoms that are specific to complex post-traumatic stress disorder? Difficulty controlling your emotions, feeling very angry or distrustful towards the world, constant feelings of emptiness or hopelessness, feeling as if you're completely different to other people, feeling like nobody can understand what happened to you, avoiding friendships and relationships or finding them very difficult, often experiencing dissociative symptoms, physical symptoms such as headaches, dizziness, chest pains, stomach aches, things like that, and regular suicidal feelings. So this is what I experienced. Every single one of them, in fact, on that list. And this is what I've healed from. Okay, so I'd like to also explain what Mind says about what treatments are available for this post-traumatic complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So they say the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, an organization in the UK, the organization that produces guidelines on best practices in healthcare, has not yet developed recommendations specifically for complex PTSD. They caution that the existing guidelines for PTSD weren't developed for this kind of diagnosis. You may find standard treatments for PTSD helpful, but many people with complex PTSD need more long-term intensive support to recover. As a part of your treatment, you should also be offered support for other problems you experience, such as depression, drug and alcohol use, or disassociation. The treatment you're offered may depend on what's available in your local area. So this is the challenge that I faced. I had gone to many psychologists. I had gotten treatment from many psychologists over lengthy periods of time, but I hadn't healed. And I was still extremely struggling with everything on that list. Okay, so what did I do? I was very lucky. I got help from a lady who had basically decided she can see that there aren't treatments available. This was back in 2006, and she had figured out things that can work for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So I learned a lot from her, and then I continued and learned a lot myself as well in addition. Okay, so I can't explain the whole healing process to you because it's too it's too complicated. Each person's healing journey is going to be a little bit different from each one else. So what I'm talking about here is my healing journey, what I found worked for me, and also what I have found when working with other people and hearing about other people's healing journey, success healing journey, that it has helped them. Okay, so the first one is validation. Now, when you go to a therapist, that is one form of validation. You talk, you tell your story, you get heard, you get acknowledged for what you've experienced. But there are many other forms of validation. Writing was a big part of my validation experience. It was also very validating to actually start realizing that everything that I was struggling with, everything that you saw on that list, and actually I had a lot more symptoms than that, but I had everything on that list, that it came from something. It wasn't just random. I wasn't just a complete mess. It came from something. that was very validating to me. And as I started to build and fix my life, that was also a second validating step, because the way that you actually realize that you have that you've completed this validation step is you can start asking yourself the question, what is important to me? Out of all the different things in the world, what is important to me? As survivors, or as people who are struggling with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, we often do not actually have any idea what's important to us. We sort of vaguely do. We might think we do, but if it really comes down to it, we're trying to survive most of the time. That's what we're trying to do. So we haven't had emotional energy. We haven't had, just in general, the capacity to figure out, who am I? What's important to me? Etc. Okay, so the second one is anger. It listed there as one of the big things is anger. Anger can be a huge thing. Anger, distrust for the world. And this was a big one for me. Now, for me, the healing side of that was actually intentionally starting to connect the dots between, here's all my anger. It sometimes spews out at people and things and situations, often without me seemingly being able to control it. And I finally started putting the dots together and directing my anger where it actually should have been going the whole time, at what had happened to me, at the people, the people who had done the things to me that that were traumatic, at certain unfair, as a result of that, you often have things that happen to you that are unfair, sometimes circumstantial, sometimes just because you're now trying to cope and you're trying to survive, and because of that you can't function properly in the world, and it all just builds an enormous amount of anger. So getting the anger to actually go to the right place where it should be aimed, that I'm angry at what happened to me. I'm angry at the results of what happened to me. I'm angry at the consequences I now have to live with because of what happened to me. I'm angry at all of that. That took quite a while, but that was extremely healing in the end. It was definitely a step I had to go through, and I had to face. And this enormous distrust for the entire world, again, putting your distrust in the right place. I distrust everything that failed me. I distrust the abuse and the abusers. I distrust everything that was evil, but not necessarily the entire planet. Okay, so and that's a process. I'm explaining it quickly, but yeah, it's an important step to go through. Okay, the next one is grieving, and this, of course, is about all the things that we lost. It's about the opportunities we lost, the peace that we lost, the instead of being able to figure out who we were in life, we were trying to survive. That is an enormous loss. It can affect the rest of our lives, our career trajectory, the way that we might have made different decisions in our life. I mean, it's an endless list. And that grieving process, you actually need to intentionally grieve that loss. That was a big part of the healing. And that you've actually done this when you can actually start accepting your story. Not necessarily accepting it like, with good feelings or whatever, but just accepting that happened. That's the horrible plate that I am having to carry through life now. But that acceptance is actually, it's a very big part of the step. And once you get to starting some of the acceptance, that you've actually taken that step. Okay. The next one, I call it usefulness. Okay, so you can read what Kristen Neff, Neff, Kristen Neff, she writes a lot about the common human experience that we all have. And I think I must read a little bit of what she writes because it's so powerful. So she says she is an expert on self-compassion. And this usefulness that I'm talking about is actually stepping out of our world, our problems, our situation, our everything, and actually connecting more with other human beings, nice human beings, good human beings, making good connections, but connecting in a useful way. So in a helpful way, in a way that is productive and useful, because, and the way I did this was volunteering, but there's a gazillion ways to do it. The way you do it could be anyway. It could be the job that you do. It could be anything. That helps you to understand that we're all in the same common humanness. Okay, so let me try and read it to you. Okay, this is Kristen Neff writing this. Frustration at not having things exactly as they want is often accompanied by an irrational but pervasive sense of isolation, as if I were the only person suffering or making mistakes. All humans suffer. The very definition of human means that one is mortal, vulnerable, and imperfect. Therefore, self-compassion involves recognizing that suffering and personal inadequacy is part of the shared human experience. Something that we all go through rather than being something that happens to me alone. She goes on to write, self-compassion also requires taking a balanced approach to our negative emotions so that feelings are neither suppressed nor exaggerated. This equilibrium stance stems from the process of relating personal experiences to those of others who are also suffering, thus putting our own situation into a larger perspective. It also stems from the willingness to observe our negative thoughts and emotions with openness and clarity so that they are held in mindful awareness. Mindfulness is a non-judgmental, receptive mind state in which one observes thoughts and feelings as they are without trying to suppress or deny them. We cannot ignore our pain and feel compassion for it at the same time. Sorry, there's a noise outside. Sorry about that. Let me read that again. We cannot ignore our pain and feel compassion for it at the same time. That's a huge statement. That is a huge statement. That is one of the reasons why I believe that connecting in a useful way to other human beings is such an important part of healing, because we actually need to see how everyone suffers. We need to see how we're not the only person suffering. We need to see how we have advantages that some other people don't have. We have disadvantages that some other people do have. We have to be able to actually see that. Anyway, so yeah, doing all of that builds this awareness in us that we can't ignore our own pain. And by not ignoring other people's pain, we help ourselves to not ignore our own pain. And if we don't ignore our pain, then we can actually give ourselves comfort for it. We cannot ignore our pain and feel compassion for it at the same time. Such a powerful statement. Okay, so you know that you have successfully completed this step of what I call usefulness. When you start having gratitude for stuff in your life, So obviously there's plenty in your life that you don't like, that is not something to be grateful about, but there's always going to be stuff that you will be grateful about. And when you connect in this useful, positive, uplifting, good way with other people, whether it's in your job or in volunteering or whatever, you start seeing what you have when you see someone who doesn't have it. So, for example, I have never been homeless. And when I was volunteering, some of the people I was volunteering with had also gone through bad stuff, just like I had, but they'd also been homeless in their life. And I suddenly was like very grateful that, I went through hell and I went through shit and I went through all sorts of terrible things, but I was never homeless. And so, like, bit by bit, I started becoming more and more grateful for what I did have, for what I had had. And that was extremely powerful in my healing journey, to actually start acknowledging that it wasn't my entire life that had been bad. There had been parts of it that were terrible and that had caused me so much pain, so much distress, and so many symptoms and problems. But there were things I could be grateful for. And that step was what helped me to realize that. Okay, next one. So, all right. So this one is, I call it safety. And this is a step that, for me personally, it actually took more than 4 years for me to get to this step. Which is sad because it's something that can be learned. It shouldn't have had to take me as long as it did. And what I mean by safety is that I had to learn that the stories that were going in my head, because we have thoughts, we have self-talk. Every human being has self-talk. And the stories that were going in my head were not necessarily always supportive towards me. And I had to actually learn that I had to question my own stories in my head and find out if they were genuinely valid and legit and truthful in the real world. Like, so in other words, if I was having the story in my head, that person hates me, that person hates me, I had to learn, I'm assuming that. I'm telling myself a story. And the safety aspect of it is learning to actually start talking to people and understanding that many of the things that we think in our head are not true. Okay, so this was a big thing when I got married. It's actually where I finally learned this thing, because I would tell myself stories in my head about what my husband was thinking, which is ridiculous because I can't read my husband's thoughts. I can't read my husband's thoughts. And eventually the penny dropped and the light bulb came on, and I realized I need to communicate with him, and I need to say to him, if I'm starting to think something in my head about what he's thinking, I need to say to him, are you thinking this? And if he's not thinking that, then that story in my head can stop. And I don't have to go into this whole having assumptions and thinking I know what's going on in someone else's head, which is huge. Okay, so that's the safety thing. And and it's the way that you know that you've gotten this step right is that emotional regulation, and as it said here on the list, difficulty controlling our emotions. I had healed a lot of that, but there were still the stories in my head. So none of these things are just one thing and sorted. And this was a great example of that. I had solved a lot of the emotional difficulties in my life, but I was still not having really good control of my emotions and my emotional regulation. And this final step, this final piece, is what finally finished that and solved that and healed that. So I managed to heal all of the things on that list, and I can help other people to do it too.